Max Verstappen is a massive vindication of the aggressive Red Bull approach to Formula 1 that has also come at a cost neatly summed up by a recent Lewis Hamilton dig. If F1 drivers aren't good enough, they're gone from the grid. That's how it works, right? Well, as Hamilton suggested recently, I'd say that's how Red Bull works. That came after Nyck de Vries lost his drive just 10 races into his rookie campaign, the latest example of a ruthless Red Bull approach to F1. So Hamilton's right, but Red Bull is too. Its tactics have come at a cost, but they also won Red Bull Verstappen, which has paid off big time. Let's put what Hamilton said into perspective. When de Vries was dropped 2 races before the summer break, Hamilton said he was surprised by Red Bull's decision against a driver Hamilton and Mercedes know well because de Vries was part of their team previously. Hamilton said it wasn't enough to give de Vries 10 races, but that's how Red Bull do it. When it was suggested that some would say that's how F1 works, Hamilton replied, "I would say that's how Red Bull works." Now, we all know there's no love lost between Hamilton and Red Bull, but tribalism aside, there was a sincere point being made here. The 7-time world champion is a beneficiary of fierce loyalty from his initial backers McLaren and Mercedes. Hamilton spent 6 seasons and won a world title with McLaren after making his debut with the team, while the move to Mercedes has been rewarded with massive success and meant that manufacturer has been a constant fixture from the start of Hamilton's career through to today. Nobody's pretending de Vries would have had the same success had Red Bull shown a bit more loyalty, but Red Bull's hire and fire approach is clearly not in keeping with how Hamilton believes drivers should be treated. He has a point, and Red Bull's conduct is self-defeating sometimes too, as it has caused itself all kinds of problems with its driver approach in recent years, even now. But we'll get into that in more detail later in this video. Let's focus on Red Bull's tactics for a little longer. Hamilton said he was surprised Red Bull didn't give de Vries more time, but he shouldn't have been. Verstappen's team has a unique attitude to drivers and has been particularly aggressive since putting him in an F1 car at just 16 years old. Back during Verstappen's stunning first year of car racing in 2014, straight into European F3, he had offers on the table from both Red Bull and Mercedes. Anyone familiar with Verstappen's fierce Hamilton rivalry in recent years and how the Red Bull-Mercedes dynamic has evolved will appreciate the surreal notion of an alternate reality in which Verstappen's a Mercedes protege. As talks with both parties progressed, Red Bull played its trump card. Mercedes' offer was to back Verstappen in the next phase of his junior career, while Red Bull would call him up to the majors instantly, offering him a Toro Rosso race seat for 2015. That made Verstappen's mind up. He was in an F1 car by Friday practice at the Japanese Grand Prix, aged just 16, and would contest the full 2015 season just 17 years of age. It was the most extreme manifestation you can imagine of Red Bull's commitment to backing and finding the best talent and demanding they sink or swim. And we can take Verstappen's arrival on the scene as the moment Red Bull's reputation as a generous backer with extremely high standards started to become something else. There is still a lot more to say about how that worked out with Verstappen specifically, and we will say it, but the impact on the rest of Red Bull's young driver program has been immense. In fact, there's an argument that Verstappen fundamentally influenced every major driver choice Red Bull has made since and every failure that followed. We'll start with the obvious one. Daniel Kvyat was dropped from Red Bull Racing after 4 races in 2016 to make room for Verstappen, who'd been extremely impressive as a rookie at Toro Rosso, but had also been involved in significant tension with teammate Carlos Sainz, or perhaps to be more accurate, tensions between their respective entourages. By this point, it was clear that Red Bull held Verstappen in the highest possible estimation. With an emphasis on keeping him happy and backing his obvious talent, his rapid promotion to the top table was guaranteed. We all know that Verstappen famously won on his Red Bull Racing debut, and went from strength to strength, but Kvyat never recovered from that initial demotion. He was demolished by Sainz at Toro Rosso, dropped before the 2017 season ended, re-signed for 2019 when Red Bull had no actual junior drivers it wanted to promote, then dropped again at the end of 2020. Directly or indirectly, Verstappen destroyed Kvyat's career, and he massively impacted plenty more. A lack of total faith in Pierre Gasly, who Red Bull had always had doubts over and definitely didn't view as a Verstappen-esque talent, delayed his debut. Gasly did eventually get onto the grid with Toro Rosso when Kvyat was dumped and Sainz pushed to leave to join Renault, which Sainz did primarily because Verstappen's rise meant he knew he had no future at Red Bull himself. That led to a strange Gasly-Brendan Hartley pairing at the end of 2017 and for 2018, and Hartley was an unusual choice. Nobody was quite ready in the junior team, although Red Bull was keen on the mercurial Dan Ticktum, but he didn't qualify for a super license. Bafflingly, instead of picking up an independent young driver from the F2 ranks like, say, Oliver Rowland, Red Bull opted for Hartley, a driver it had dropped from its junior program years before and who'd spent the past few seasons enjoying success in sports car racing. It wasn't exactly a logical fit for a junior team, and he certainly wasn't a future Red Bull racing contender. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work. Hartley was binned after one season, and the Red Bull conveyor belt post Verstappen had shuddered to a halt. Then things were further complicated by a gap surprisingly arising alongside Verstappen at Red Bull. Verstappen had become increasingly prominent and successful alongside Ricciardo at Red Bull Racing, and Ricciardo decided it was better to cash in and bet on a new project at Renault where he could be the leader than stick around to find out if Verstappen really would get preferential treatment. It left Red Bull with a space alongside Verstappen for 2019, which was rightly filled by Gasly given his status as the highest ranked junior, while not one but two ex-Red Bull youngsters were recalled to take the vacant Toro Rosso seats, Kvyat and Alex Albon. Gasly's Red Bull racing career was effectively over before it started. Crashing twice in pre-season was a bad omen, but he was smashed by Verstappen so badly on track and was a character Red Bull had such reservations over off-track that he only lasted half a season. Gasly was dropped in the summer break, and Albon, halfway through his rookie campaign and having never driven an F1 car before pre-season testing, was suddenly Verstappen's teammate. In other words, one driver was put back on the bench at Toro Rosso and the other was set up for an inevitable failure against Verstappen. Shock of all shocks, Red Bull found itself in another driver quandary barely a year later. Albon's struggles intensified in 2020 after a solid start, and Red Bull wanted to drop him, but had no faith in re-promoting Gasly while Kvyat was out once again. Honda protege Yuki Tsunoda at least gave it an alternative to Kvyat for Toro Rosso, now called AlphaTauri, but there was nobody to put alongside Verstappen for 2021. So Red Bull went outside its own driver pool for the first time in almost a decade to sign Sergio Perez. While that stopped the rot in terms of Verstappen's teammates being completely broken, it underlined a major Red Bull issue and still caused a few more. Gasly pushed for a complete Red Bull exit during 2022, knowing he had no future there, and was allowed to move to Alpine for 2023. And while Albon was back on the grid at Williams and thriving, he'd already split properly from Red Bull. That and a lack of faith in any of Red Bull's junior drivers in F2 led Red Bull to sign de Vries for AlphaTauri. Then he was dropped midway through this season as Ricciardo, of all people, had come back into the Red Bull fold as a third driver following his McLaren exit and was angling for a race return. Part of Red Bull's rationale was to evaluate Ricciardo as a short-term option for AlphaTauri, but with Perez starting to struggle more against Verstappen, Ricciardo's also potentially a longer-term replacement to reclaim the Red Bull racing seat he vacated years ago. It's been several quite extraordinary years in Red Bull's F1 driver pool, and Verstappen being a unique talent and an impossible-to-match teammate has been at the heart of it. If you could go back to the summer of 2014 and tell Red Bull chiefs that signing Verstappen would lead to all that driver drama but yield the kind of success he and the team are enjoying now, they would sign up for it instantly. The ultimate goal is to win, and Verstappen has won big. He'll become a three-time world champion this season. He's won 45 Grand Prix and counting, more than Sebastian Vettel for Red Bull, and at this rate, who would bet against him matching or beating Vettel's tally of 4 titles? The way Red Bull got its hands on Verstappen actually had a hint of the original Red Bull wonder kid Vettel about it. Vettel had already made his Grand Prix debut for BMW in 2007 and was that team's test and reserve driver when Red Bull, who had also backed Vettel in his junior career, was able to offer a Toro Rosso race seat. BMW released Vettel, and as they say, the rest is history. Using a Toro Rosso seat to land the young driver of its dreams comes down to not just having that opportunity, but being willing to take it. Red Bull's never been afraid to make big driver calls, but as we've covered, Verstappen sparked a bigger change in Red Bull's fortunes for better and for worse. Vettel set an imposing reference for everyone who followed him at Toro Rosso. The likes of Jaime Alguersuari, Sebastian Buemi, Ricciardo, Jean-Eric Vergne and Kvyat were all auditioning for a Red Bull racing future that Vettel was the benchmark against. But Vettel broke nothing. Some of those drivers did better and some did worse. One of them even beat him, another then replaced him. He was ultimately just part of the process. It's not been that way with Verstappen, and a key reason is that so far, no other driver has come along to shake Red Bull's confidence. Vettel was the undisputed top dog until he wasn't. Ricciardo was a good enough option to promote to be his number 2 for 2014, and then Ricciardo showed he could be more than that, and Vettel wasn't the be all and end all. So when Vettel jumped ship for Ferrari in 2015, it wasn't the crisis it could have been. There was still a system underpinning it all. Now though, Red Bull's dealing with a string of failures to find its own protégés who can handle life alongside Verstappen. There are no obvious short or even medium-term candidates for a Red Bull racing seat, let alone to replace him one day. And while it's fair to point out that Verstappen does set an incredible standard, it's also worth scrutinising Red Bull for why it hasn't been able to identify and nurture better prospects. The Red Bull Junior Team programme probably needs a root and branch review in terms of talent identification, if not how Red Bull treats those drivers. Other teams have massively upped their game in the scouting department since the Vettel and Verstappen days, and Red Bull's scattergun, slightly ad hoc approach to signing juniors just doesn't cut it anymore. That means it's working with a diluted talent pool and then not necessarily treating that talent in the best way. The general principle of being ruthless because you're chasing the best talent is fine. Red Bull backs drivers so much, giving them everything up to and including a chance in F1, that it owes them nothing beyond that. This isn't that black and white though. Getting into a situation where Red Bull hired someone who didn't fit the brief at all because it had no juniors it trusted, then binned him off almost instantly to rehire an older ex-driver yet again is something that should be addressed. That's something Red Bull needs to do, but Verstappen's success has perhaps papered over how urgently needed that action is. And success is the ultimate currency in F1. So if overhauling its junior program and harshly dropping the occasional underachiever in the interim is the price for what it's achieved with Verstappen, then Red Bull would pay it every time.